I think a lot of practices aren't also looking at how easy is it for that person to find information. That's why we talk about having a rich, large vault of content on the website.
This is the Aesthetics Growth Podcast.
Hey everyone, it's Brad, and I'm back with another episode of the Aesthetics Growth Podcast. And today we got something really special for you. I am excited to welcome and to get to interview and speak with my partner in crime, the one and only Brad Ferris. Brad is our Chief Clinical Officer at ClinicGrower, co-owner, and he also coaches medical aesthetic practices all across the US, including at the Aesthetic Nexus. With over a decade of clinical experience, an MBA, and a passion for scaling aesthetic practices, Brad really brings proven frameworks and best practices and coaching strategies to aesthetic practices all over the US to help them grow. Brad, super excited to have you on the show.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Hey, let's jump straight in. Let's find out a little bit about your journey. How did you go from, not from birth, we'll start a little bit later, but what took you into the world of aesthetic medicine? I'd love to get that quick story from you as to how you ended up where you are today.
Well, the simple truth is, graduated in 2009, actually went into fertility in 2010, helped to scale a fairly reputable practice here in Ontario to a fairly large size. And women that are generally experiencing fertility, their bodies have aged a little bit faster or differently than other people, right? There's obviously lots of other things that happen with infertility, but you would notice some premature aging on the face of patients. And guess what? This, sometimes they were getting Botox in between treatments, and they were kind of wanting to make sure that they're looking good and fresh and young. And as we obviously evolved our agency ClinicGrower, it became really obvious that, well, pretty much all of the patients that are going to these medical spas and the cosmetic practices, I mean, they're all looking for the same outcomes. So how we used to speak to those patients, we would develop relationships with those patients, we would focus on their journey throughout the practice. It made a lot of sense just to create those parallels that we were doing inside of the fertility practice. All those patients generally have kids, but they're sociable in the same way, they're interacting with other individuals in the same way, and they really do appreciate the work that everyone puts into making them look fantastic. Sometimes people think it's about looking artificial. It's not. Most patients want to just, like we always say, look better and feel better, right? They want to be enhanced in a respectful and balanced way. And when we're crafting the marketing messages to that audience, it feels like I'm back to being a fertility nurse.
I love it. I remember when we met a number of years ago. It was almost like the synopsis was kind of from bedside to private equity to ClinicGrower. And I know that we can unpack a little bit about your wealth of experience there. And it's kind of interesting, right, how that all ties together within what you're doing when it comes to serving and growing medical aesthetic practices. We see that there's big moves in the space, and we'll maybe break that down a little bit. But could you, for anybody who really, doesn't or hasn't, met you yet or doesn't know much about you, break it down a little bit as far as, what was it that really was the impetus to pull you into the world of aesthetic practice growth? Because you've been doing some tremendous stuff in the space.
I think what's really nice about our industry is predominantly, it doesn't mean that it's exclusive, but we are dealing with my medical peers wanting to scale and grow their practice. They do tend to be the lead, right, in that practice. So they might be the medical director, they might be the lead injector, they might be the face of the brand overall. So for most of them, to be honest, they're very good friends. I consider them colleagues. I consider them, family to a certain degree. And when they're having challenges, we're building resources, we're doing webinars, maybe on site, actually teaching the team in an impact training. It's not a regular medical practice. And a regular medical practice locks the door at lunch, right? A normal medical practice is like, oh, the phone can go to voicemail. These generally are practices that are really involved. We call it the red carpet Disney experience, of course, right? Like they're speaking with these patients, they're helping them preview their experience, they're building relationships, they're getting into memberships. For a lot of them, their culture is much more aligned to what I enjoyed inside the practices that I was managing, whether it was in pediatrics or fertility or in other areas. So I think those parallels just make this job for me a lot more enjoyable. Yes, they want to make a profit. Yes, they want to expand maybe to multiple locations, but they're just great people. And I think that's probably the biggest reason that we kind of settled into this segment.
And you're on the front lines with the coaching, especially working with between ClinicGrower and the coaching that you do, really all different shapes and sizes of practices, from folks who haven't yet even opened the doors, they're kind of ready to make that next move, or the entrepreneurship ideas are swirling around their mind, right up to 10-figure businesses that we work with that are considering selling to private equity, even some of the private equity backed practices that we work with. But Brad, what would you say when you look at the universe of aesthetic practices and the aesthetic entrepreneurs? Where do you see that most of them get stuck, and what's often the root cause?
I think a lot of them get stuck in the planning phase. It can be very overwhelming. I think sometimes they want to skip over that just because there's not great resources, great coaches, great partners that are out there. I did just get off a coaching call from a young practice owner in Nevada this afternoon where she didn't know where to go for a business plan. She didn't know how to calculate her margins. She didn't know how to anticipate what the first month cost would look like, how that might change into the second or third month, like what even her break even would be. The fact that we have those resources is why a lot of practices will seek us out. The fact that they're usable and they're easy to understand, and the feedback that we get from these clients all the time or prospects is like, wow, I didn't realize it was that simple to do. But because we put the time in, because we've done that for so many of our clients, because I enjoy and we both enjoy mentoring, right, that next generation. Now she's got a great set of resources. She can go to the bank. She can get a small business loan. She can launch her practice. And obviously, she knows that we're there, hopefully, as a marketing partner into the future.
What you said there kind of brings me back as well to, it was the first call, actually the first time that we met, right? It was a client that we both worked with many years ago. And I remember being on the call, and that practice was using the systems that I created with advertising and some lead nurture. And this is going back before there was more advanced systems that we use today. But I remember on that call that the challenge for her was, you know what, like, I can't, our team just can't get to the phone quick enough. I know it's a problem, not sure what to do. And you kind of swooped in, or just glided in, and you actually had some capacity with the call center that you had as part of your operation, and said, hey, you know what, Kathy, I'll give you some of our agents. We'll bring them in here because that's what you need, or that's what's going to help you. And so just at the center of that really comes what you finished off saying there, which is that value-driven approach that you take, and that thing that we take, at ClinicGrower as well, relative to just trying to make sure that the people that we interact with are left in a better place than they were before we spoke with them, or before we interacted with them. Can you talk a little bit, Brad, about what that's like, and perhaps how you hear colleagues in the space saying how maybe that differentiates, or how it's a little bit different from the way other quote unquote marketing agencies do business?
Yeah, well, I mean, it comes from what we call an abundance mindset, right? And that first situation, that's now probably 6.5 years ago, right? That Kathy was that kind of mutual client. And I mean, we actually spoke to them just a couple of months ago, right? Not necessarily about anything business related, but just how are things going? What's new? What's happening? When you come into business with an abundance mindset, yes, there's competitors, and yes, there are markets and all of that. But just like the event that we've got at the end of April, we're having, some individuals are in the same market. They're coming to the same event. They're learning the same content, but what they're going to do with that content is totally different. Neither of them can serve the entire market. They're going to have their segments and they have their areas of specialty, but they can coexist in a preferable way, right? We can be competitors, but also be peers. Competition, sometimes people will feel like, oh, I've got to take that person out, or that person can't exist. And it's like, well, no, an abundance mindset is there's more than enough business out there for everyone. There probably are people that want to just totally dominate an entire market, but patients also have the choice overall of where they want to go and what they want to do.
I love that. Yeah, the abundance mindset, and the growing a business, as we know, and as we coach practices too, just that mindset can be all the difference. And we could probably do a whole podcast on that. Something that you mentioned a little bit earlier was, when it comes to the resources and serving those practices, and finding out, how you can help them, finding out the root cause of what they're struggling with. For anybody listening, is there almost like a simple question, or kind of a diagnostic tool, a question that you like to lead with to kind of understand, where that practice is, and to try and evaluate what they're struggling with so that you can help them?
It's a loaded question. Trying to think if there's I mean, I think it comes down to your goals, right? A lot of the time I speak to the practices around what's their daily goal, their weekly goal, their monthly goal, right? I think when they're
Mm.
struggling, and then maybe it's related to education of their team, maybe it's related to patient flow, it most often is going to be revenue focused. It's okay, well, if you want to achieve this outcome, what do we need to be able to achieve on that daily, weekly, monthly basis? And for someone that wants to get to $70,000 a month, right? There's all sorts of different ways that they can do that with Botox and facials and other types of services. But it does come down to how many people do we have? How productive are we being in the business? And then at the end of the month, it's going to accumulate to that if we've got a good plan. Many of them, as their Google business profile is not optimized in the way, or not even maybe potentially created. Maybe their branding is fairly weak, and I don't say that in a mean way, but I mean, I think some of us know that our brands need to be powerhouses rather than kind of like mute little kittens. Um, Sometimes it's just how they're having conversations with their patients rather than struggling to get to reviews. It's just asking, how did we do today, right? Like, how was your experience? Do you have anyone? We talk about postcards all the time. Like, are they taking materials outside of the four walls and the ceiling that is your business and helping you distribute those to people that are like them? Or are you just using a single marketing channel that's only having a single marketing message, and you're potentially disappointed with how that's producing a result?
Right. Love it. And getting kind of into the marketing piece as well, because I know that you coach really on some of those foundations when it comes to growing the business. And obviously marketing is an important part of that. When it comes to setting up those foundations, and for anybody listening who's either they're growing their business, they're at a certain level, maybe they got started, maybe they're about to hire. If we're going to break down some of those pillars, what do you see is one of the most important, or some of the foundational pieces that aesthetic practices really need to have in place before they get to the marketing piece?
I mean, hiring is really, really key. I think we don't probably spend as much time on hiring the right people, the right approach. I mean, they might seem like an all-star, but are they really developing the practice and growing the practice in the same direction that you did as a solo, as an owner? I think everyone struggles with sales. I think it's a common. Everyone will tell us, of course, that they're great at sales, but the actual conversion to a second visit is a really big challenge for a lot of these practices. They get the people in the door for that initial, kind of whatever the promotion is, right? Whatever the external special that they're running, but then that person just pauses and they're not quite sure, they're not quite convinced. So for a lot of our practices, we talk to them about, okay, you're doing a um, good faith exam. Are you doing a good faith follow up, right? Are you reaching out to that patient who's had Botox for the first time, day 6 or day 7? Like, hey, send me a picture, right? How's it going? How does it look? Are you excited, right? Like, you're going out this weekend with your husband. Send me I want to see how good you're going to look, right? When you're at a really large practice, that may not be as needed, because obviously you're busy and you've got a large marketing budget and stuff. But when you're small, that stuff makes all the difference in the world. And if you're not having that conversation with them, remember, someone else is trying to inside their social media feed, on Google, on
Yep.
YouTube. And I think sometimes we forget, or we take for granted, that that person's going to be bombarded for the next 3 months with messages tempting and teasing them away from you. But you had them in your practice, you had them inside of a conversation with you. Again, it's a time commitment, but I think those are small little things that we teach practices that end up having a big impact overall for them.
For sure. For sure. I mean, some of the foundational things that you mentioned there. So having the team, right? Training a team as you're scaling, having the Google business profile you mentioned a little bit earlier. Most practices have got a website. Is there any particular mistakes or sort of bottlenecks or traps that you see in the aesthetic practices falling into when they're setting up those foundations and starting to move forward with their marketing?
I think the vast majority of the time, they're not perceiving their practice from the position of the patient. So I'll give a great example. A lot of Google business profiles that we look at, Google has the car driving by, taking a photo of the outside of the business, and then they post on the main primary picture as the outside of their business. And it's like, okay, so
Yep.
we have the map, the standard photo of the car that drove by, and the first picture that we chose was another one of the outside of the business. We tend to be a little bit introverted as healthcare professionals. We're better again, inside the room with that patient than we are on stage being boisterous and visible. So that's one thing. I think, we're not telling the brand or the story or the impression of that practice as well as we can. I mean, on a marketing side, we go through about 100 things with them on the website, right? Is it fast? Is it responsive? Is it built on the right platform? I think a lot of practices aren't also looking at how easy is it for that person to find information and how easy is it for Google to find that information about you. And I think that when there's that disconnect for them, then they're looking at the phone, wondering why it's not ringing, not realizing that's because the patients can't find them as easy as they need to. And also Google can't find out as much as they want to. So that means then they're not showing that business to as many people looking. And when you can fix those things, generally what we hear practices and clients say is, oh my goodness, why is the phone ringing off the hook? We need your help, right? And it's those small little adjustments. So McDonald's years ago as a manager, we used to call it a travel path. You'd have to walk around the restaurant. What is the consumer seeing, right? Because you only see the other side of the counter. So as managers, it was mandatory. I think every 2 hours we had to go and check the garbages and do all that stuff. But then you'd realize, oh, the rags here, or this is visible over there. That kid doesn't have his shirt tucked in, right? When you're inside of the business, it is tough to see those things. And sometimes that's one of the things that our strategist team will help with.
Interviewed somebody recently, we were talking about, when you're inside the container, you can't read the label. And what you were talking about there as well with, the almost like the internal secret shop, just looking at everything through the patient's eyes. I want to break down some of that a little bit more, but you just kind of went through really importantly from one of those foundational pieces, kind of before you get into some of the glamorous or the sexy stuff with spending a lot of money on advertising and the paid ads, and we can talk about that. But for aesthetic practices, having that foundation in place so they can be seen, like you said, by understanding how they're showing up, looking at things through the lens of the patient with what they're showing like on those Google business profiles. And, it's that type of patient that you've got to really put the work in there to make sure you're being found by those patients that are actually putting the time in to do the research and look for the services you have. But I'd love it if you could talk a little bit about some of the just the technology, the tools that you use, maybe through some of the heat maps and things that have been a bit of a game changer for some of the practices that you've been coaching and the clients that we've been serving.
Yeah. So we describe those breadcrumbs, if you think of Hansel and Gretel, the old story, or we talk about it as signals, right? What's the strength of a signal that Google or another, and now, I mean, the AI snippets, I don't know if we've gotten into that into the podcast at all, right? But more and more clients are seeing their information used in different ways delivered to people at different times. And if that information isn't there, it's not easily found, that signal that we talk about isn't present, then it's going to be one of the competitors, or it's going to be someone else that's identified as more relevant that is shown. So, the world has changed from it used to be, early 2000s, I just had to rank my website. Google would put me in the right position. Well, now we got ads, we have the map pack with AI snippets. There's things that are now competing for that. And the world's going to change too, where, a lot of these AI agents, Alexa and Siri and all that stuff, I mean, they're going to be pulling information from different sources. Well, guys, guess where they're pulling that information from? Your website, the content that you have. That's why we talk about having a rich, content robust, like large vault of content on the website, because we can't control what is looking and reading that information. But the fact that it's relevant, the fact that it's helpful, the fact that it's present makes all the difference in people finding you.
Sure.
And yeah, I mean, that's like the 2030 kind of looking forward that we talk to clients about having all the time. They do have, most practices do have a budget that they have to stay to, but there's lots of clever ways that you can use that information to your advantage rather than waiting for your competitor to figure it out.
Yeah. I know we talk a lot about, educating clients, and our clients will tell us, hey, their best clients, their best patients are educated patients. We kind of covered that a little bit with what you just mentioned with the content and educating patients and doing it through the topical authority, the blogging that you mentioned, even creating videos and how-to videos. And for most aesthetic practices, that's what they're really good at, right? It's like educating those patients. Then it comes down to capturing that. And I know that you've been working ahead and innovating with some of the things we've been doing here at ClinicGrower. And I'd love it if you would maybe introduce the audience a little bit to that next step, when we're talking about, educating and inspiring patients, and some of the things, the techniques that we found are not only important but just really critical to making your advertising work on in the video marketing aspects like YouTube and Meta, for example.
So it's big, but yes. So there's different segments of the market that you're wanting to speak to. There are the patients looking for a new home. They've had a treatment before, but they're looking for like the place that feels like home, similar to their hairdresser. You also have this massive market that's never had a needle in their face. They've never had Botox. They might be open to it. They might have misconceptions. They might think that a facial is going to cause a breakout. The most successful practices that we're working with are out there educating and inspiring in combination. When I'm inside the room observing them, they are doing that on a one-to-one individual basis. But I keep bringing back the four walls and the ceiling as an example because it's not captured. It doesn't come outside of that room. And yeah, a patient eventually may send a referral, right, or give a review, but it's a very watered down synopsis of like the power of that engagement, or we call it a therapeutic relationship in nursing. Um, so the practices that are doing the influencer content, right? We call it show and tell, right? You're showing what the experience is like. You're talking about your beauty tips of the month. You're we call it objection handling, but it's basically like pre-educating the market around, this is why appeal at this time of the year is ideal. And a lot of people are doing that, right? It's April 3rd, and I know at least 4 of our clients that have had peels this week, right? People that are more engaged in generating that content, one, it gives us the opportunity to put it in so many more places. But it's also a lot more inspiring. It's showing someone that this is normal or normalized. This is something that they deserve. And again, there's lots of scripts that we give that kind of, but you're planting a seed in their mind of this is something that I want to do, right? So we use the example a lot of the time with our practices about walk-in Wednesdays, right? Wednesday tends to be a little bit slow in a lot of practices. Not everyone likes the concept, but for a brand new Botox patient that might just want to try 10 or 12 units to get them in the door, right? I have those rules, right? Rule number 1, get the patient to show up. To
Yep.
get that patient in the door is a foundational change to the business because otherwise that patient would never come. And if that patient was never going to come, you would have never gotten lifetime revenue from that patient. It doesn't mean that everyone has to do it, but at some point you kind of have to start looking at, how are you going to just get calls? I mean, you can get calls from Google, and yes, we can do lots of advertising and stuff like that, but you also need to have the organic growth and a following from your content.
Yeah, that's powerful. I mean, a lot of stuff going on there, and kind of to unpack it, with the educational piece, it's getting the business owner to simply kind of talk more about what they're doing, educate those patients on their services, using blogging, written content, creating video. The inspirational piece that you mentioned, that's where you're layering in patient testimonials, getting the users online, the prospective patients to be inspired to come into the practice, showing a little bit about the personality, getting the personality of the owners across, that user-generated content or the influencer content that you mentioned. And then down towards the bottom of that, really, you've got the attract piece, right? Which is, generating not only those leads, but having patients, having real people schedule appointments and come in. And we could do it again, another whole segment just on that attraction and sales piece. But if you were to break it down, Brad, with some of the fundamentals you absolutely have to have in place when it comes to so close, you've got that interest, that desire, that person has scheduled the appointment, what's working and what mistakes are too many practices making to perhaps not convert that patient?
So the speed to lead is really important, right? When the patient is at their highest intent, highest interest, highest desire, you've got to try to meet them where they are. The longer that you go without that conversation, the more that either doubt slips in, or hesitation, or distraction, or all those other things. Again, I think how we speak to on the phone with those patients, right? We have specific scripts that we give where we use a lot of gratitude and we use a lot of inspiration. We reference the experiences that the patients have. We reference the reviews that are being generated or that showcase the practice well. Again, the best practices, yes, a patient may want to book an appointment right away, but they're also understanding, well, what are those patients' goals? They may want to come in for Botox. I'm not going to argue with them on the phone about coming in for Botox, but if that person has more correction or more maintenance as their main objective, we may want to start talking to them about different incentives, different products and services. I know a lot of practices that we're helping right now are using a lot of AI facial analysis tools, right? So they're giving these patients very, very detailed assessments on, hey, this is what we would recommend here. This is what we would recommend next. And as patients initially heard of those things, they're like, I'm not sure. But then they see the results and they go, yeah, I definitely want to correct that or work on this or pursue that. And, practices are having a lot of success selling larger packages with that, right? The biggest thing I think is in the follow-up, right? So you've booked that patient. Do they have a map to the location, right? Are you sending them your reviews, your narrated before and afters? Are you showing them what the experience walking in the practice is going to be? There's probably a list of 15 things. You don't have to do all of them. But again, that person does have to put their shoes on, drive to the practice, right? Give you that time. And in 2025, I mean, we have a lot of things that are competing for people's attention, kids and life included. And we can't afford to have that no-show. I mean, we need that patient coming in so that we can treat them and we can hopefully get them back in for future treatment.
Right, for sure. So change it up a gear here. I want to hit you with the rapid fire round. Okay.
Okay.
You ready?
I guess. Yeah, sure.
All right. So easy one for you because you got lots of these, but give us an example of one of your favorite client success stories.
My favorite client success story so far was Elaine Verhalen, who's one of our clients, absolutely loves balloons. And when we learned about balloons for her birthday last year, we sent her balloons in a box. And a fairly conservative person, right? Very lovey and kind of, appreciative and a wonderful personality. But we kind of saw her go back 20 years younger. And on video, she's opening this box and like she's just blown away, right? By the thought, the attention, the fact that Leandri had remembered that this was something that she was really excited with. Pictures that we got, she's beaming, she's excited. It kind of was a really nice opportunity for us to see like an example of like that's the level of attention and commitment that we give to our clients. So I still have that photo on my phone, and I think of that often in terms of just the size of the smile that she had.
Awesome, love it. How about any particular story of growth, a certain practice that you've coached or worked with that had a breakthrough? Anything that stands out that's memorable there for you?
I mean, many specific ones. I think back to Lindsay Vance, right, from Venaflex. So it was probably 3 years ago that I did a sales training with her, and we still have that recorded and share it as one of our best ones. But she had never been through a screening process of how to take a patient through the entire process and the assessment and then making a recommendation and giving confidence. And obviously her practice has continued to grow since that, which is wonderful to see. So anytime that you can kind of chip away at someone's perceptions of sales as sales rather than advocating and educating, that to me was a huge win.
All right. We know that we love the 3-letter word over ClinicGrower SOP. What's a framework or SOP that every practice should consider implementing this month?
Which SOP should they consider? I don't know. That one I'm drawing a blank on. I'm trying to think of, I think the one that we've got, which is our review SOP. So you've finished an amazing treatment with the patient. We all tend to get a little awkward in that last 5 minutes of our visit because we're not quite sure. We got to talk about payment, plus we got to talk about next appointment and all that sort of stuff. I think just breaking it down for someone of a simple way to end that visit, and we won't give it away here because obviously you guys have to reach out to get it from us. But I have a very unique way of having a phrase that just, again, elicits the review. The patient will volunteer the review. It'll be important to them to leave the review. And I think if we're not checking in with patients as they're leaving a practice, we also run the risk of potentially a negative review or something negative that's shared about the business that we're not aware of. And to me, I think that would be the most important SOP is just how do we get a pulse on how happy that patient is as they're leaving the practice.
Yeah, so such a good one. I know that it's a foundational one, and there's a lot of practices that have started to get that under control. We love when we can wave that magic wand and help those practices that we work with get an additional 30, 40, 50 reviews, and those first couple of months, which can really be transformative for not only how they're showing up online, but also staff morale. And it just creates boosts all over the business. So I love that one. Brad, how about the best piece of advice that you've ever received?
I got a lot. I mean, I think back to some of my nursing mentors in terms of just focus on the patient, right? That at the end of the day, that person, how they're feeling, how they're standing, right? You don't know what's going on in their life when they walk in the door. But then you can control the moment that they walk in the door. Asking good questions, doing a good assessment, just telling people what you're going to do next, giving them the time frame and result of what you're about to do. Those are things that even in my business today, I still carry with me from 15 years ago.
I love it. Awesome. That's it. You're off the rapid fire
All right.
round, but just following on, because that, the advice that you've received there is tremendous. How about when you're looking at your practices that you coach, clients, even someone who's listening, a practice owner, business owner, essentially, who's feeling stuck, right? They've hit that wall. What piece of advice would you give to them?
They've hit a wall.
Stuck or overwhelmed, perhaps.
I mean, it is overwhelming. So I think it's recognizing a lot of the time that being an entrepreneur it's not easy. It's not easy at all. I think what you do is you draw energy from what gives you energy, right? So if you need to go and do a meditation or a bike ride, or it's eating something that makes you feel better, or it's sitting down and talking. I mean, I counsel a ton of practices, just not even clients, just on like a 5-minute, hey, this is a struggle that I've had, this is what I've got. I always think you're allowed to let it bother you for a specific period of time, but then you can't just let it weigh you down. And I think the biggest thing for all of us is we know what's going to get us out of a funk. So if you're stuck there, it's probably doing something non-business related for a short period of time that is going to help you free up your mind. And I just think a lot of us don't ask for help when we know that we need help. And I think we're afraid of being turned down or being laughed at or anything like that. And we think of Marley, you think of myself, you think of other individuals that are in the industry. We're not going to give unlimited advice all the time, but I think if most people are struggling, we would definitely reach out and at least help that person get to that next step.
I love that. And I love draw energy from what gives you energy. I think that's so important. And like you were saying as well, entrepreneurs, business owners, aesthetic practice owners, doctors, getting caught up in that machine sometimes of serving patients, taking care of staff. You really, it can turn into a little bit of a hamster wheel. So just taking those few minutes, that 5-minute reset, like you mentioned, that's a great tool for anybody listening here. Brad, we unpacked a lot here. I'm going to see you around. You'll see me around. We'll definitely have to do another episode in the Aesthetics Growth Podcast. Where can people best connect with you to learn more about what you're doing, what we're doing at ClinicGrower, or any resources that might be helpful for them?
Yep. I mean, our social media. I mean, whether it's Instagram, it's Facebook, it's LinkedIn, those are probably the 3 most active that I'm on. Whether we're doing a webinar or we've got something going on in terms of an event, or I'm always posting on my own personal profiles for that as well, or just send a message. I mean, our emails aren't difficult. It's our first names at clinicgrower.com, Brad and Bref. Sometimes that gets a little heavy, but I'm always going to reach out and say hi and connect with people. I mean, it's nice that at this point, the businesses that we have are getting closer and closer to being run on autopilot by the teams. So I'm excited for the next couple of years when I'm going to have more time to be able to give back to the community and spend more time teaching, because that's what I really love doing.
And I'll just parlay on what you said there as well, as far as the personal touch. Without giving too much away, we recently did some vision building and some kind of like resetting of our future journey as a company. Is the personal touch, the personal approach, knowing our clients, and for business owners, knowing your customers, caring about your customers, and making sure you got systems in place to understand them and to communicate effectively with them. Brad, thanks a million for sharing both of our personal communication methods. If this podcast blows up to the millions, we're in for some trouble. Brad, thanks a lot. That was a lot of fun. Really enjoyed it. And we'll definitely have you back on another episode of the Aesthetics Growth Podcast sometime soon.
Thanks for having me.
This is the Aesthetics Growth Podcast.